How it is. So the second category we'll talk about from the adrenal glands are glucocorticoids. Again, it's made from the cortex. That's why it's called a corticoid. Also steroids. These also are involved in like fight or flight responses. And their job is essentially to up the glucose levels in your bloodstream. They can do some other things. They can up your blood volume. They can speed up metabolism. But the main function is to increase glucose. That's why they're called glucocorticoids. The main example of one of those is cortisol. So cortisol is a glucocorticoid. Cortisol is a hormone that falls into that category. And notice that one of its main things that it does is it promotes the creation of new glucose, gluconeogenesis. It causes your body to make glucose essentially from scratch. Go ahead. You'd use either fat or proteins to make the glucose. But probably why cortisol is most famous, at least in medical terminology, is that it's anti-inflammatory. It can lower swelling, and it's used to treat swelling, after surgeries. It's also used to treat it during asthma attacks and such. And probably the most famous lab-made version of cortisol is prednisone. So this is sort of an artificial version of that. I'm going to imagine that some of you probably taken prednisone before, whether it was for treating asthma or for treating swelling after some kind of surgery or something. Pretty common effect. Another problem with the glucocorticoids, though, is that they can have anti-immune system effects. They can lower your immunity. So if you're under long-term stress, your immune system becomes weaker, and you tend to get sick more, largely because of these hormones. The last category of things we'll talk about coming from the cortex of the adrenal gland are gonadotrophic. And they are what they say they are. They're hormones that normally come from the gonads, either the ovaries or the testes. Some of them are androgens. What does it mean to be an androgen? Yeah, it's a man hormone, right? A male sex hormone, an androgen, like testosterone. You ladies, though, have some testosterone. Small amounts. You don't have the normal testosterone-making parts, though. The testosterone you have is coming from the adrenal cortex. And it has some important functions. It causes puberty to start in women. It's important for sex drive. It also helps women to make, not so much the testosterone, but the adrenal cortex helps the women to make some estrogen after menopause. Essentially, your ovaries don't make much after menopause, right? Most of the estrogen you have after comes from the adrenal. Us guys have a little bit of estrogen too, and it's coming from the adrenal cortex. But the other thing that we need to mention, and the thing that we've already talked about several times before, is the middle part of the adrenal gland, the inside part, the medulla. This makes a category of hormones called catecholamines. And even if you haven't ever heard that word before, you've heard of the main example of one of these, which is epinephrine or adrenaline. And there's a very closely related hormone called norepinephrine. So those are the catecholamines, at least the main ones. And you know that they help to reinforce, prolong fight or flight. That's what you need to know about the adrenal medulla. Fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. And they can do that in a lot of ways. Adrenaline can raise the blood sugar levels mainly by affecting what organ? The liver, right? Telling it to do what? To break down what? Glycogen, release glucose.
Blood pressure.
Blood sugar. Blood sugar. It can speed up the heart rate. Adrenaline or epinephrine can cause blood to be diverted to the brain, the heart, and skeletal muscles. Where's that blood being diverted from? Like the internal, like the digestive system and stuff. Essentially, this is kind of strange, What's the message that adrenaline sends to the blood vessels that are feeding the heart, well not the heart, the stomach and the intestines and such? Yeah, it's telling them to constrict. So they get more and more narrow. But that same hormone, what's it telling blood vessels that go to like your muscles and stuff? Dilate. So it's got separate, opposite messages depending on where in the body it's binding.
Because it doesn't like stop your digestive stuff to like focus on.
Right. So essentially, it's slowing the blood flow, and that slows down the whole process when the blood flow slows. So that's adrenaline. One thing you will see on this test on Friday is a question about, sort of like the question we had on the last essay, the last test, about cell signaling. And a good example of that would be the whole, how does adrenaline affect the cell in the liver? What's the first step in cell signaling? Reception. So in that case, adrenaline would be the what? The ligand. And that has to bind to what kind of receptor? G protein receptor or G-linked protein receptor. Where's that found?
It's found on those.
Yeah, it's an extracellular receptor, right? Because adrenaline is not a steroid. So it binds. They fit together like a lock and a key. And after reception, kind of the last part of reception is what?
The piece of the oxygen itself.
Yeah, what do we call that? Conformational change. And that piece that breaks off, that alpha subunit, where does it break off at?
On the inside.
Yeah, just inside the cell. So that transmits the message from outside to inside. That little G protein unit then slides down the inside of the cell membrane, eventually bumping into what? Yeah, an enzyme called adenylyl cyclase. And what's the little G protein carrying with it? G what? GTP. Kind of like ATP. It phosphorylates that adenylyl cyclase, turns it on.
What? For the GTP?
GTP, just like ATP. Once this enzyme is turned on, once it's activated, it takes in ATP and converts it to what? CAMP. And it does that over and over and over and over and over. And it's one of the places where the amplification part happens. What step of cell signaling are we talking about now? This is transduction. And the job of transduction is to spread the message where? From just inside the membrane through the whole cell, right? Not to other cells, just inside this particular cell. And it does that essentially because CAMP, each one of those CAMPs is then going to go activate what? Kinase, which is going to activate another kinase, which is going to activate another one in this crazy phosphorylation cascade or signal transduction pathway until eventually at the end what gets activated? Which is what? What are we trying to activate here if we're talking about adrenaline in a liver cell? An enzyme that breaks down glycogen so that glucose can be released, right? That's the response part. And remember, a response can be something like that, breaking something down. It could be turning on a gene, turning off a gene, turning on a chemical reaction, turning it off. It could be opening up a channel, like in a nerve with a neurotransmitter. All kinds of things that could happen. One other note about the test on Friday, make sure you can explain negative feedback. That's one of the main ways that that hormones work. Negative feedback is a process that's always trying to keep you where? At the set point, trying to get you back to homeostasis. That's all we're going to say about the endocrine stuff today. Make sure you can label the diagram of the endocrine system. We're going to switch over and talk about the immune system, though, for the last few minutes. And you'll see as we get deep into this immune system stuff, a lot of this we've already talked about when we're talking about cell signaling, but not so much the stuff we're going to deal with today. Most of the stuff that we've already heard a little bit about, we'll get next time. We know the immune system's job is to protect you from what we might call pathogens. What's a pathogen? Yeah, it's anything that can make you sick, right? And in humans, the big two are what? Viruses and bacteria. There's some other pathogens. What are some other human pathogens? Some type of fungi. You going? Some kinds of protists, like that brain-eating amoeba that's been in the news a lot lately. Well, that's fungal usually. Worms, tapeworms and hookworms and pinworms. Watch Monsters Inside Me at a time or two. You'll learn a lot about worms there. Your immune system's job is to protect you from all those things. Now, there's several lines of defense in your immune system. We're going to talk today about what's called the non-specific, or sometimes it's called innate immunity. What's the word innate mean? Yeah, it means like built in. You had it. It's natural. You always had it. Built into you. It's pre-programmed. Innate. So this non-specific part, I want you to think of it sort of like your Great Wall of China. It's there just to keep things out. Not particular things, just things in general. It's there to protect you from not a specific flu virus, but just pathogens in general. By far the most important part of this non-specific or innate immune system is your skin. And we think of your skin like a barrier, and that's a big part of it. It is a barrier. You don't want holes in your Great Wall of China, right? You get holes in your skin, you got some problems. But the skin is not just a static barrier. It also makes secretions that help to kill germs. It makes some secretions that are acidic. It makes other secretions that are antibacterial. It's not just a wall. Sweat, for example, is somewhat acidic. And what do we know acids do to living things? Kill them, denatures of proteins and stuff, right? So that can happen. Sweat also has this stuff called urea in it, which we've mentioned a couple times. Where does that come from? Well, it ends up in the urine, but where does it come from? Why do you make urea? Well, let's do this. Let's draw this up here first. What is that a picture of? That's an amino acid, right? That's the building block of what? Yeah, but proteins, right? Whenever you eat proteins, you're first going to break it down into amino acids. You're going to hydrolyze the protein. But then when you get ready to use this amino acid, what part of this gets broken off first? If you want to use it to make energy, what do you need to break off? You need to break off the amino group over here, the nitrogen-containing part. This part will go into cell respiration, and you can use it to make energy. But this part gets broken off over here. What does that look an awful lot like? What chemical? It looks like ammonia, right? It turns out it grabs onto a hydrogen ion and it becomes ammonia, NH3. Well, ammonia is the stuff that's in a lot of cleaners and stuff, right? It's got that horrible odor. It's very toxic. Every time you eat proteins, your body starts to generate ammonia. It's toxic. Now, if you were a fish and you were eating proteins, what do you do after you generate that ammonia? You filter it out, not through your gills, but through your kidneys, and you just urinate all the time. If you're a fish, you're just urinating out all the time. It's not a problem because you're in water and you're not worried about getting dehydrated. You're also probably not so worried about swimming in your own urine, but you're a fish. You hadn't thought about that, right? But if that doesn't work for mammals, because if we use that system, what would happen? We'd dehydrate really fast. So instead, our liver takes in this ammonia and converts it to something that's still toxic, but that's less toxic, and that's urea. And that way we can hold on to this stuff. We can keep it in our bodies for a while. We eventually got to get it out. We eventually have to urinate it out. But we can keep it in there for a while. We don't have to urinate all the time. That's urea. Still toxic though. We sweat some of it out and it helps to kill germs on your skin. So your skin is not just a static barrier, it's an active barrier. It's a wall, but it also has the defenses built into it that help to kill germs. Let's skip down and talk about inflammation here for a second. Anytime you get a cut, a burn, you get swelling in that area, right? Maybe minor, but it gets kind of red and puffy. That turns out to be a good thing. When cells are damaged, when tissues are damaged, cells in that area release some cell signals. Usually one of these two, maybe both. Histamine or another group of chemicals called prostaglandins. And what are those signals telling your body? Well, yeah, histamine essentially says, hey, it's like an SOS signal. It's saying there's damage over here, send more away. Yeah, send more blood in general. So it causes the blood vessels in that area to do what? Dilate. Now, at first glance, that sounds like kind of a bad idea, right? To send more blood to a cut. Yeah, but there's what are the pieces of the blood that help to start the clot? What do they call them? The pieces that help to start a clot. Platelets. And now you've got a hole in your wall, you got a cut. So you better send what else? You better send the border patrol, right? And in this case, what's the border patrol? The white blood cells to get any kind of bacteria or viruses or fungi that broke through the wall. You're sending in something to not only repair the hole in the wall, but also to police it. That'd be a good way to put it. So that's histamine, released by damaged tissues, essentially to call in the cavalry. Call in more white blood cells, call in the platelets, fix the hole, police the area. Let's skip down and talk about this stuff right here, interferon. And kind of obviously that word looks like what? Interfere. Anybody know what it interferes with? It's a protein, first of all. It's a protein that's in your body fluids, and it interferes with the lytic cycle. What's the lytic cycle? Virus reproduction cycle, right? So it's a chemical that's not protecting you against any specific virus. It just slows down the rate at which viruses can reproduce. Viruses in general. Yeah.
Is that something that people who have AIDS lack?
It's not so much that they lack it. They can manufacture this stuff now. And it was one of the early treatments for HIV. They may still be using it. It's been used to treat stuff like hepatitis and other virus diseases. One you might not think about is stomach acid. As part of your non-specific immune response. Think of all the things that go in through your mouth and even through your nose. Most of those end up in your stomach. And what happens to living things when they hit the stomach acid? They denature for the most part. Just what's the pH in there? Put a number on it. Like 2-ish. 1 to 2-ish. Very low pH, very acidic pH. That kills most of the germs that come in through your mouth. But again, not a specific germ, just germs in general. All right, if we go on down and look at the next thing, what's the word flora usually mean? Flora. Yeah, it means flower, literally, right? So usually is the word used to refer to flowers, plants. What word usually gets used at the same time as flora? Fauna. What's fauna mean? It's like animals in a place. We're talking about your immune system. Are we talking about plants and animals here? I don't think you have plants and animals living in you or on you, right? But what do you have living in you or on you?
Bacteria.
Yeah, the microorganisms that live on or in you. Mostly bacteria, but there might be some fungi and other assorted microorganisms. So when we talk about the local flora, that's what we're talking about. The microorganisms that live like in your intestines, on your skin, like in the female reproductive tract, there's a lot of bacteria. How are they part of your non-specific immune response?
Because they want to live there more than other people, so they attack them.
Yeah. Not so much attack them. I want you to think of them sort of like your offensive line. For example, in the female reproductive tract, there's lots of bacteria. Because they're there, what can't be there? Harmful things, like yeast, for example. What happens to a lot of women after they've been on antibiotics for a while?
They get yeast infections.
They get yeast infections. Because that antibiotic not only kills whatever you were trying to kill, it also kills the good stuff. And now the offensive line is not there, and things start to grow that aren't supposed to grow. Same thing happens in your intestines. A lot of people, when they're on antibiotics, get sick at their stomach. They get diarrhea and stuff. Not the antibiotics making them sick. It's the lack of those bacteria, the good bacteria, and therefore things that are not supposed to be growing there start to grow there. You killed off the good stuff. What a lot of doctors tell you to do when you're on antibiotics to help prevent that? Well, yeah, but eat yogurt, that kind of stuff, because what's in yogurt? The good stuff, okay, the good bacteria. Replace the ones you're killing is one of the things a lot of doctors will tell you. Let's skip up and talk about saliva, and let's also add in tears here. Think about, how many of you wear contacts? I mean, that means that every day you're poking yourself in the eye, at least twice, probably more. You're putting these plastic things that you've been touching all over your hands straight into your eye. No telling what's on those sometimes, right? But how many eye infections do you get? I've been wearing contacts for 20-something years, and I can think of maybe two bad eye infections that I've had. It doesn't happen very often. And that's like an opening straight into your body. Think of your mouth, all the things that go into your mouth, and how few mouth infections you tend to get. One of the main reasons is that in saliva and in tears is a chemical called lysozyme, which should tell you it's an enzyme that does what? Kills, breaks things down, bacteria, viruses, maybe even fungi. Helps to kill germs. And it's really good at protecting openings into your body, like the eyes and the mouth.
What did you call it?
Lysosome. Right here, lysosome. And then let's also think about your mucous membranes for a second. Where do you have mucous membranes? Yeah, essentially every opening into your body is coated with mucous membranes. So we think nose, but ears, your eyes, the ducts going into like your tear ducts and stuff, the urinary openings, the anal openings, they all have mucous membranes. I mean, their main job in terms of the immune system is to act sort of like a what? In terms of immunity, what are your mucous membranes doing for you?
To like trap it.
Yeah, so they're like a filter almost, right? They're catching stuff. And at least the ones up here in your nose and mouth area, they're eventually sending that stuff where? To your stomach. Kill it. But let's think about the ones in your respiratory tract for a second. They not only do that kind of thing, filter out the air, what else do they do for you? It's pretty important, especially this time of year. What do your mucous membranes really need to do for you? Let's say it was like last winter when it was like 4 degrees. You go outside, that air you're breathing is really, really cold. One thing in mucous membranes is what? Somebody said it. They warm up the air. Because what's coming to those mucous membranes? Heat, because there's a lot of what coming through them? Blood. You've got lots of blood vessels coming through them. So lots of heat. So they warm up the air as you breathe it. What else is really important to do to the air this time of year? It's not so important in, say, July in Alabama. What's the air like right now? Not so much today, but it's dry in the winter, right? Your lungs don't work if they dry out, right? So the air that you're breathing in the winter needs to be moistened. The mucous membranes are good at that because they got lots of blood vessels, lots of little capillaries that are notoriously leaky, And one of the things they leak out is moisture. So your mucous membranes not only act like a filter for you, filter out germs and other assorted things, they also help to warm up air when it's cool, and they help to moisten it, which are equally important. Two more quick things and then I'll call it a day for right now. You also have these chemicals in your body called pyrogens. Everybody sees the word pyro and you know what that means, right? What's pyro mean? Fire. We're not talking about spontaneous combustion or something here. That's not a real thing, by the way. But we're talking about chemicals that cause you to increase your body temperature. Cause a fever. Turns out a fever is a good thing in most cases. That makes you feel terrible, right? You have a fever, you feel horrible. And most people go and do what as soon as they get a fever?
Cover up.
And they take Advil or Tylenol or something like that to lower the fever. Is that a smart thing to do in most cases? The fever actually helps you fight the infection faster. It's part of your immune response. You're going to feel crappy for a while, but you're going to get better. If you take that Advil, you feel better, but what are you doing? You're prolonging the fight. It's better just to feel bad for a day or so and get over it than to pop all those Advils and feel sort of bad for a week. The immune system works better, some parts of it, when your body temperature is a little above 98.6. You're better off, unless it's a crazy high fever, to keep the fever, help your body fight its fight, and win the fight, and then be done with it. All these things we just talked about are parts of what's called your non-specific or innate immunity. It's not protecting you against any one particular thing. Let's mention one other thing about that, though. Maybe the coolest named cells in your body are these cells called natural killer cells. These cells are just zipping around in your bloodstream and also in your lymph vessels. What are they looking for?
Are they like reading the
Things with the wrong proteins. What do we call all those proteins on the surface of your cells? What's the acronym? MHC, right? They're looking at all these little MHC proteins on the surface of your protein, on the surface of your cells, rather. And if some of them are wrong, that tells them, what am I going to do? I'm going to kill that. And it sort of goes Wolverine on the cells. It has these proteins called perforin. What's perforin sound a lot like? Perforate, which means to do what? Poke holes in things. So that's what it does. This perforin protein pokes holes in the cells that have the wrong MHCs and it kills them. It may be a bacterial cell. It may just as easily be a cell of your own that has a virus infection. It may be a cell of your own that has mutated and become cancerous. So it's just patrolling in general, not for a specific invader, but just things that are wrong.
So what happens like when you have a cell that has cancer but this doesn't find it? Like why wouldn't it kill it?
It could be that it's not showing any weird proteins on the outside, that everything's going on the inside. I'll mention this last part and then I'll call it a day. All those things were non-specific. Where we're going next, this stuff we kind of already talked a little bit about, and that's the specific or acquired immune system. In this case, we're talking about fighting off a very specific germ. And it also is called acquired, which means you got away.
It's awareness.
You got to get it. You got to build it up. You're not born with it. You have to build it up over time. And there's two words that I've stressed to you before, and I'm going to stress again. And we'll talk a lot more about these next time, too. When we see this word antigen, what should we think? What is an antigen? It's an alien protein, foreign protein, a protein that's not supposed to be in you but is. And when we're exposed to antigens, what does our body then make? What do we make in response to antigens?
Antibodies.
Antibodies. So always link these two words together. These are made in response to these. Pathogens are anything that can make you sick. So bacteria, virus, protists, those kinds of things. But now antibodies are proteins too. I want you to think of an antibody kind of like an enzyme, which means it has a specific what on it? Yeah, but it's got a groove on it, right? And what does that groove have to fit to, in this case? The groove on the antibody has to fit the antigen, like a lock and a key. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't work. That's why it's specific. The antibodies actually kill germs, in most cases. No, they're kind of like a mark for death. They attach to it, and they're saying, here it is, here it is, here it is, and they're signaling other parts of your immune system to come and kill it. But it makes the process faster. The key thing, though, this is specific. This antibody will only attach to what? That one antigen. And that's why it's very specific. And it's also why after you fight something off, what gets left behind? Yeah, you have these memory cells. You have memory T cells, you have memory, what are the other memory cells? B cells that remember this specific antigen. And if you're exposed to it again, they make the response happen so fast that usually no one gets it. So we'll go a lot deeper with that next time. Good place to stop. Okay.